Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine standing on a quiet hill overlooking the city of Rome. It's the year 117 CE, and the Roman Empire is at its peak. The air smells faintly of fresh bread, roasted olives, and something you can't quite identify. Probably street food cooked by someone's grandmother. Beneath your feet, the great stone roads stretch out like endless rivers, carrying merchants, travelers, and gossip from one corner of the empire to another. And there it is, Rome, the heart of the empire, the eternal city. The city hums with life. Marble temples shine in the sunlight, their white stones glowing like they were polished by the gods themselves. The Colosseum towers above the streets, a massive stone beast where tens of thousands gather to watch gladiators, wild animals, and occasionally a few unlucky criminals. Entertainment. The aqueducts, those giant stone bridges that carry water from faraway mountains, snake across the countryside, bringing life to the city. Imagine crystal clear water flowing steadily into public fountains where citizens fill clay jars, laughing and chatting about politics, scandals, and who wore the wrong sandals at the forum yesterday. Rome is rich. Rome is powerful. Rome feels eternal. And yet the story we're about to tell is not about Rome's glory. It's about how it all slowly, quietly fell apart. But don't worry, we're not rushing there yet. For now, let's just enjoy the calm before the storm. At its height, the Roman Empire covered 5 million square kilometers, from the misty hills of Britain to the deserts of Arabia, from the forests of Germany to the sands of North Africa. The empire was a web of cities, roads, and ports, all connected by Roman engineering and organization. You could literally travel from one end of the empire to the other and always find something familiar. Roman laws, Roman coins, Roman baths, and of course, Roman gossip. Trade was booming. Ships brought spices from India, silks from China, gold from Africa, and wine from Gaul. The Mediterranean Sea wasn't just water anymore, it was a Roman highway. Imagine sitting in a tavern in Athens, sipping wine imported from Spain, eating dates from Egypt, while listening to a poet from Gaul complain about Roman taxes. That was everyday life under Rome. Rome's population was a mix of everything. Citizens, slaves, merchants, senators, soldiers, everyone lived under the same empire but lived very different lives. The rich lounged in lavish villas decorated with mosaics, sipping wine from silver cups and debating philosophy. Meanwhile, the poor lived in noisy apartment blocks called insulae, where your upstairs neighbor's goat probably kept you awake at night. And then there were the Roman soldiers, the backbone of the empire. Tough, disciplined, and probably a little smelly, they guarded borders stretching thousands of kilometers. Without them, Rome wouldn't survive a week. But soldiers weren't just fighters, they were also builders. They built roads, bridges, forts, and cities. Wherever they went, Rome followed. It was like the Roman version of setting up Wi-Fi, spreading their connection everywhere. Romans loved order. They had rules for everything: how to build roads, how to run markets, even how to debate in the Senate without throwing sandals at each other. Daily life was surprisingly modern. People shopped at busy marketplaces called fora. They relaxed in public bathhouses, the ancient Roman version of a spa day. And they loved their fast food. Street vendors sold bread, cheese, and garum, a fermented fish sauce that Romans put on almost everything. Yes, even dessert. Don't ask why. Entertainment? Oh, they had plenty. Gladiator fights, chariot races, theater performances, and poetry readings. Romans worked hard, but they definitely knew how to throw a good party.
To the people of Rome, the empire felt unstoppable. They called it Roma Eterna, eternal Rome. And looking around, you can understand why. They had the world's strongest army, the most advanced roads, aqueducts, and cities anyone had ever seen. They had wealth pouring in from every corner of the known world. But here's the thing about history. The moment everyone thinks something will last forever, that's usually when the cracks start forming. Rome was no different.
In the shadows of all this glory, problems were already brewing. Corruption in politics was rising. Senators cared more about gold than governance. Taxes kept climbing, making life harder for ordinary citizens. Slave labor meant fewer jobs for free citizens, causing tension in the streets. And out there, beyond Rome's borders, new threats were gathering. Far away in the cold forests of northern Europe, tribes like the Goths and Vandals were slowly, steadily pushing toward Roman lands. No one in Rome worried too much about it, yet. But for now, in 117 CE, life still feels safe. The city is alive, the empire is wealthy, and the streets are filled with laughter and arguments about philosophy, politics, and whether chariot racing is a sport or a gamble. Imagine walking through the Forum Romanum, the heart of public life. Stone pillars rise around you, senators debate loudly, street performers juggle flaming torches, and someone shouting about selling you the best olives in the empire. If you pause for a moment, you can hear the sounds of distant construction. Another aqueduct, another bathhouse, another temple. Rome is always building, always expanding, always dreaming. And as the sun sets, the golden light touches the rooftops, and you can't help but feel like this city really could last forever. But it won't.
Tonight, we leave Rome at its highest point, shining, powerful, and confident. But history has a way of humbling even the greatest empires. The roads that connect the empire will one day carry armies marching against it. The aqueducts that bring life will one day crumble, and the eternal city will face its darkest days. For now, though, let's stay in this moment, where Rome stands tall under the Mediterranean sun. Because in the next chapter, the shadows will grow longer, and we'll start to see how the seeds of Rome's fall were planted long before anyone noticed.
Close your eyes for a moment. We're going back in time, way back, before Rome became the massive empire we saw in the last chapter. Back when Rome was just a republic, run by senators, rules, and a whole lot of arguments. It's around the year 509 BCE. Rome has just kicked out its kings, yes, they had kings once, and decided never again. From now on, no single man would ever hold all the power. Sounds noble, right? Well, you'll see where this goes. Early Rome was small, just a city trying to survive in a dangerous neighborhood filled with rival tribes and ambitious neighbors. The Romans set up a republic, basically a government where citizens elected representatives to make decisions. There were senators, magistrates, and 2 consuls who shared power. The idea was simple. No single person could control Rome, at least on paper. In reality, rich families, called the patricians, ran the show. Ordinary citizens, known as plebeians, didn't have much say at first. That didn't sit well with them. So, over time, the plebeians fought for more rights, protesting, refusing to fight in wars, and basically saying no equality, no loyalty. Eventually, they won some political power, and Rome became a little more balanced. Well, kind of.
As the Republic grew, so did Rome's ambitions. By the 3rd century BCE, Rome wasn't just a small city anymore. It was a rising power. First, They defeated neighboring tribes. Then they set their sights on bigger prizes. Cue the Punic Wars against Carthage. Yes, that Carthage, the one with the famous General Hannibal and his war elephants. Imagine this. Hannibal marches his elephants over the snowy Alps to attack Rome. It's one of the boldest moves in history. The Romans? Well, they weren't exactly thrilled, but somehow, after years of bloody battles, Rome came out on top. And suddenly, Rome controlled massive territories around the Mediterranean. Wealth poured in, gold, grain, slaves, spices, everything. But here's the thing, success brings problems too.
Rome's victories made it rich, but they also made it unequal. A handful of elite families became extremely powerful and wealthy, while ordinary citizens struggled. Farms failed, unemployment rose, and resentment brewed. Meanwhile, the army became more loyal to generals than to the republic itself. Soldiers started seeing their commanders as leaders, not the Senate back in Rome. This was a dangerous shift. Rome was growing too big, too fast, and the old rules weren't enough to hold it together anymore. And then came Julius Caesar. Picture this, a brilliant, ambitious Roman general with a sharp mind, a charming smile, and a talent for making friends and enemies. Caesar wasn't just a soldier, he was a master politician too. In 58 BCE, he began his conquest of Gaul, modern-day France. Over 8 years, he defeated countless tribes, secured massive wealth, and became a hero to his soldiers and the Roman people. But back in Rome, the Senate started to panic. They thought Caesar was becoming too powerful, and honestly, they weren't wrong. They ordered him to step down and disband his army. Caesar's response? Nope. Instead, in 49 BCE, he marched his army across the Rubicon River, a direct act of rebellion. It was basically Caesar saying, "All right, Senate, if you want me gone, come and get me." This sparked a civil war.
Caesar won. He became dictator for life, which is ironic because Rome had literally created the Republic to avoid having kings. But Caesar wasn't all bad. He made reforms, gave land to poor citizens, reorganized the calendar, thanks for July, Julius, reduced debts and stabilized the economy. Still, not everyone was happy. In 44 BCE, on the Ides of March, a group of senators, including his close friend Brutus, stabbed Caesar to death. According to legend, Caesar's last words were "Et tu, Brute," which is Latin for "You too, Brutus?" Though, honestly, he might have just said "ow." We'll never know.
After Caesar's death, chaos took over. Rome spiraled into another civil war. Two powerful figures rose to the top: Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal friend, and Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir. At first, they teamed up to defeat Caesar's assassins. But power has a funny way of ruining friendships. Soon, Antony and Octavian turned on each other. Antony allied with Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, which didn't exactly win him fans back in Rome. Eventually, Octavian defeated Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. Antony and Cleopatra, well, let's just say their love story didn't end well. Octavian emerged as the sole ruler of Rome. In 27 BCE, he took the title Augustus, becoming the first Roman emperor. But here's the clever part. Augustus didn't call himself a king. He kept the Senate and the old republican titles, making it look like Rome was still a republic. In reality, though, Augustus held almost all the power. Under Augustus, Rome entered the Pax Romana, 200 years of peace and prosperity. Roads improved, trade flourished, cities grew, and Roman culture spread across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. It was a golden age. But
by turning Rome into an empire, Augustus solved many problems, but also created new ones. The strengths: a stable central authority kept the empire united. Wealth and culture thrived under strong leadership. Rome became the most powerful force in the known world. The weaknesses: everything depended on the emperor. A good emperor meant peace, but a bad one? Disaster. Over time, the Senate lost real power, and Rome became vulnerable to corruption at the top. In trying to save Rome from chaos, Augustus also planted the seeds of its future troubles.
by the time Augustus died in 14 CE, Rome had transformed completely. What started as a small republic had become a vast empire ruled by a single man. For now, things looked stable. Citizens enjoyed wealth, entertainment, and security. But deep below the surface, old tensions remained. Political rivalries, social inequality, and the growing dependence on powerful rulers. Rome had traded one set of problems for another. And eventually, those problems would come back. The Republic was gone. The Empire had risen. Rome was stronger than ever, or so it seemed. In the next chapter, we'll explore the Pax Romana, Rome's golden age of peace and prosperity, and see why the empire felt unstoppable, even though cracks were already forming. But for tonight, let's leave Rome here, standing proud, shining under the Mediterranean sun, unaware that its brightest days carry the shadows of its decline. Imagine this. The year is 27 BCE. The civil wars are over. The chaos has finally ended. Rome has a new leader, Augustus, and under his rule, the empire enters a period of peace the world has rarely seen before. Historians call it the Pax Romana, which simply means Roman peace. 2 whole centuries, about 200 years, where the empire flourished, cities thrived, and people actually started believing that Rome might, just might, last forever. Picture walking through a busy Roman street during this time. Stone-paved roads stretch in every direction, connecting cities hundreds of miles apart. Fresh bread and olives fill the air with a warm aroma. Merchants call out to customers, trying to convince them that their figs are sweeter than the ones sold 2 stalls down. Everywhere you look, life feels good. The empire is safe, the borders are secure, trade is booming. And the best part? For once, nobody is marching an army toward Rome.
One of the secrets behind this golden age was Roman engineering. The Romans didn't just build stuff, they built stuff that lasted. Roads. All roads lead to Rome wasn't just a saying, it was true. Over 400,000 kilometers of roads connected the empire. Soldiers, merchants, and travelers could move faster than ever before. Think of it as the Roman version of the internet, connecting everyone, everywhere. Aqueducts. These massive stone bridges carried fresh water from distant mountains straight into cities. Public fountains, bathhouses, and even private homes had running water 2,000 years ago. That's right, ancient Romans had better plumbing than some modern apartments. Architecture. Temples, theaters, and amphitheaters rose all across the empire. The Colosseum, completed in AD 80, could hold over 50,000 people. Romans loved their entertainment, and they built it big. Roman engineering wasn't just practical, it was beautiful. Marble arches, carved columns, and giant domes made cities feel grand and timeless. Many of these structures are still standing today, proof that Roman builders knew what they were doing.
Peace gave people time to think, create, and dream. In Rome, art and literature flourished. Painters covered villa walls with colorful frescoes, little snapshots of Roman life. Sculptors carved gods, emperors, and heroes from solid marble, turning stone into lifelike perfection. Philosophy became popular too. Romans loved borrowing ideas from the Greeks, mixing them with their own. Thinkers like Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius shaped the empire's moral and intellectual culture. And then there were the libraries. Imagine walking into one of these quiet halls filled with hundreds, sometimes thousands of scrolls. The scent of ink and papyrus lingers in the air, and scholars whisper as they copy down ancient texts. It was an age when knowledge flowed as freely as Roman wine. One thing that kept the empire alive during the Pax Romana was trade. The Mediterranean Sea became a Roman lake. Ships sailed constantly, carrying goods from every corner of the empire. Wine and olive oil from Spain, silk and spices from India and China, gold and ivory from Africa, grain from Egypt, Rome's breadbasket. Markets were vibrant, loud, and colorful. Imagine a bustling forum filled with shouting merchants, clinking coins, exotic fabrics, and the occasional pickpocket darting through the crowd. Trade wasn't just about stuff. It connected cultures. Ideas, religions, and languages traveled along these routes, weaving together the empire like an intricate tapestry.
So, what was everyday life like during this golden age? Well, it depended on who you were. For the rich elite, life was pretty sweet. Lavish villas, servants, private gardens, and endless parties. Dinner could include oysters, roasted peacock, and, believe it or not, stuffed dormice. Yes, Romans actually ate mice. And yes, they thought it was fancy. For the ordinary citizens, life was simpler but still decent. Public bathhouses offered a place to relax and socialize. Theaters showed plays, and amphitheaters hosted gladiator games and races. People gathered in the forums to shop, argue about politics, and complain about taxes. Some things never change. And for the poor and slaves, life was harder. They worked in fields, kitchens, and workshops, but Roman society depended on them, and during the Pax Romana at least, food was more plentiful, jobs were steadier, and life was a little less brutal than in earlier times.
Now, imagine this. The sun sets over the Mediterranean Sea. The sky turns gold and crimson as waves shimmer under the fading light. A soft breeze carries the sound of distant music. A flute, maybe, or gentle singing from a tavern by the harbor. Fishermen mend their nets. Children chase each other through quiet streets. Couples stroll along marble-paved roads under the soft glow of oil lamps. Rome at night was calm, safe, and full of life. In these quiet moments, it felt like nothing could ever disturb this peace. If there was one thing Romans loved, it was entertainment. The Colosseum came alive with gladiator games, thousands of cheering spectators, roaring crowds, and fighters battling under the hot sun. But don't worry, not all Roman entertainment was violent. There were theaters for plays, circuses for chariot races, and festivals almost every other week. Romans didn't just work hard, they celebrated often, filling the streets with laughter, music, and wine. In a way, Rome perfected the balance between ambition and relaxation. Build roads, conquer territories, and then take a bath, drink some wine, and enjoy the sunset.
The success of this golden age came down to a few key things: strong leadership, starting with Augustus, a powerful, disciplined army that kept borders safe, an efficient tax system that funded roads, aqueducts, and public services, and, maybe most importantly, a sense of Roman identity. People believed in Rome, its power, and its future. For 2 centuries, this system worked beautifully. But as you and I know, history always changes.
Even during the Pax Romana, the seeds of trouble were already there. Some emperors were wise and fair, others, well, not so much. A few treated the empire like their personal playground, wasting money and ignoring problems. The rich grew richer, the poor, not so much. And while the roads carried wealth into Rome, they could just as easily carry invaders out of it someday. For now, though, the empire was strong, and people felt safe. For nearly 200 years, Rome enjoyed a golden age unlike anything the world had seen before. Its cities glittered with marble, its roads stretched beyond the horizon, and its culture shaped the known world. Standing in the middle of a busy Roman marketplace, you'd hear dozens of languages, see fabrics from far-off lands, and taste foods from 3 continents. But nothing lasts forever. Rome's power would face challenges it couldn't ignore forever. In the next chapter, we'll explore how the shadows began to grow, how political instability, rising tensions, and distant threats slowly began to creep into the heart of the empire. For tonight, though, let's stay here, in this quiet moment, under a soft Mediterranean sunset, where Rome is at its brightest and the world feels perfectly at peace. The Roman Empire at this point looks unshakable. Its cities shine with marble, its roads stretch endlessly, and its markets overflow with goods from every corner of the world. But if you look a little closer, just beneath the surface of this golden age, you'll start to see the first cracks forming. Rome is still strong, yes, but slowly, quietly, the shadows are growing. Running an empire this big wasn't easy. Imagine trying to manage a kingdom so vast it stretched from the icy rivers of Britain to the hot deserts of Egypt, from Spain's vineyards to the forests of Germany. It was like running multiple countries at once, with different languages, customs, and endless taxes. And of course, everyone wanted their slice of the pie. The Roman government had to build and maintain roads, bridges, and aqueducts, pay thousands of soldiers to guard the borders, fund public games, festivals, and bathhouses, and of course, keep the rich citizens, well, rich. To handle all this, Rome raised taxes. And you know how people feel about taxes. Nobody's ever written a love song about paying them.
When there's money, there's greed, and Rome had a lot of money. Senators, governors, and tax collectors started taking advantage of their positions. Some lost public funds, others took bribes, and a few acted like mini kings in their provinces. Picture a governor sitting in his luxurious villa, sipping imported wine, while his people starve outside. That wasn't rare. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens felt like the system didn't care about them anymore. The government seemed far away, busy filling its pockets, while the streets of Rome grew more crowded, dirtier, and more divided.
Rome's wealth wasn't shared equally, not even close. The patricians, Rome's elite, lived in grand villas with gardens, fountains, and private libraries. Their homes were decorated with mosaics, and their tables were covered in exotic foods. The plebeians, on the other hand, lived in insulae, noisy, cramped apartment blocks stacked so tightly together that if your upstairs neighbor sneezed, you'd probably say "bless you" without looking up. And at the bottom were the slaves. They worked the fields, built roads, and served in wealthy households. They had no freedom, no rights, and often no chance at a better life. This widening gap created frustration, resentment, and sometimes outright riots. The empire felt united on maps, but in reality, society was splitting apart. In theory, Rome still had the Senate, laws, and traditions. In practice, politics was starting to look more like a blood sport. Senators schemed against each other, generals built private armies, loyal more to themselves than to Rome. Everyone wanted power, and no one wanted compromise. Laws were bent, promises were broken. Corruption became so normal that honest politicians were the unusual ones. And when the government is busy fighting itself, it doesn't have much energy left to solve real problems. For centuries, the Roman army had been Rome's pride, disciplined, loyal, and nearly unbeatable. But now, things were changing. Soldiers were increasingly loyal to their generals, not the Senate. Why? Because generals promised them land, wealth, and rewards that the government couldn't deliver. This shift was dangerous. Instead of protecting Rome, armies started fighting each other in power struggles. Battles weren't just against enemies anymore. Sometimes they were against fellow Romans. And remember, maintaining these huge armies cost money, a lot of it. As taxes rose, resentment grew among citizens who felt like they were paying for endless wars they didn't start.
While Rome was busy arguing with itself, new threats were gathering beyond its borders. To the north, Germanic tribes, the Visigoths, Vandals, and Franks, were watching Rome closely. At first, they were just distant neighbors, traders, occasional raiders. But as centuries passed, they grew stronger, more organized, and bolder. To the east, the powerful Parthian Empire challenged Rome's influence. In the far north, smaller tribes tested the empire's defenses. And then there were the Huns, a mysterious nomadic people moving westward. No one in Rome knew it yet, but the Huns would eventually push other tribes directly into Roman lands, creating chaos Rome wasn't ready for.
Rome's success became its biggest burden. Too big to manage. Communication was slow. News could take weeks, even months to travel from one end of the empire to the other. By the time Rome heard about a problem, it had usually gotten worse. Too expensive to maintain. Taxes were high, the army was costly, and endless construction projects drained resources. Too dependent on slaves. The empire relied heavily on enslaved labor. When fewer slaves became available, especially after Rome stopped expanding, the economy started to suffer. It's like owning a massive mansion, but struggling to pay the electricity bill. Despite these growing problems, everyday life for many Romans still looked normal on the surface. Markets bustled, bathhouses filled with gossip, and the Colosseum roared with crowds. But listen closely, and you'd hear quiet complaints. Taxes are killing me. The government doesn't care. The army's fighting itself again. These little whispers were warning signs. The empire was still shining, but the foundations were weakening. By the late 2nd century CE, Rome still looked strong, but it was fragile. The peace of the Pax Romana was fading. Corruption was rising, politics were breaking down, social divides were deepening, and the empire's borders were no longer safe. It was like watching storm clouds form on the horizon while the sun still shined overhead. The empire didn't know it yet, but a century of chaos was just around the corner. For now, Rome still stands proud. The streets are alive with chatter. The marketplaces glow with wealth, and marble temples shine under the sun. But beneath that beauty,
Something is shifting. The empire is changing, slowly, quietly, and dangerously. In the next chapter, we'll step into one of the darkest periods in Roman history, the crisis of the 3rd century, a time when Rome almost collapsed completely. For tonight, though, we leave Rome standing, not falling yet, but trembling as the shadows grow longer. The year is 235 CE. Rome still looks powerful from the outside. Its roads stretch for miles, its markets are full, and its temples shine under the sun. But appearances can be deceiving, because behind the marble walls and busy streets, the empire is about to enter one of the darkest, most chaotic centuries in its history. For nearly 50 years, Rome will face civil wars, assassinations, economic collapse, plagues, and invasions. This is the story of the crisis of the 3rd century, a time when the empire almost fell apart. It begins with the death of Emperor Severus Alexander in 235 CE. He was killed by his own soldiers while negotiating with Germanic tribes along the northern frontier. It wasn't just a murder, it was a signal. From this moment forward, the emperor's throne would no longer feel secure. In the next 50 years, Rome would see over 20 emperors come and go. Some lasted years, others months, and a few only days. Imagine living in Rome during this time. 1 week, you're celebrating a new emperor. A month later, you're mourning his assassination. By the end of the year, you're bowing to someone completely different. It wasn't just politics, it was survival. Generals fought generals. Armies marched against fellow Romans instead of defending the borders. Civil wars tore the empire apart, leaving cities burned, farms abandoned, and thousands dead. Loyalty didn't matter anymore. Power belonged to whoever controlled the army, and armies changed sides as often as the seasons. Some emperors were killed by rivals. Others were murdered by their own soldiers. A few were captured and executed by foreign enemies. It was a deadly game of thrones, except there were no winners, only survivors. Gordian I and II ruled for just 21 days before being overthrown. Philip the Arab managed to hold power for 5 years, only to be killed in battle. Valerian, one of Rome's most respected emperors, was captured by the Persian king Shapur I, and legend says he spent the rest of his life as Shapur's prisoner, used as a human footstool whenever the king mounted his horse. Yes, things had gotten that bad. While Rome was busy tearing itself apart, foreign enemies saw an opportunity. To the north, Germanic tribes, including the Goths and Vandals, crossed the empire's borders, raiding towns and seizing land. To the east, the powerful Sassanid Persian Empire attacked Roman territories, defeating Roman armies and capturing key cities. To the west, pirates disrupted trade across the Mediterranean, cutting off supplies of grain and other essentials. The once mighty empire, which had conquered so many lands, now struggled just to defend its own borders. Wars are expensive. Endless civil wars, even more so. To pay soldiers and rebuild destroyed cities, the Roman government began minting more coins. But here's the problem. They reduced the silver content in the coins to stretch their supply. The result? Massive inflation. Prices skyrocketed. A loaf of bread that once cost a single coin now cost 20. Ordinary citizens struggled to survive. Markets emptied. Trade slowed. The empire's once booming economy collapsed into chaos. And when the economy breaks, everything else begins to break with it. As if war and economic collapse weren't enough, nature joined the attack. Harvests failed in several regions, causing food shortages and famine. Diseases swept through cities and army camps, killing thousands. Historians believe one of these plagues, possibly smallpox, wiped out entire communities, weakening the population even further. Imagine being a Roman citizen in these years. Your emperor changes every few months. Your coins are worthless. Your pantry is empty. And disease spreads faster than rumors. Life in the empire became a constant fight to survive. By the 260s CE, Rome was no longer a single united empire. It split into 3 separate pieces: the Gallic Empire in the west, covering Gaul, Britain, and Spain; the Palmyrene Empire in the east, ruled by the brilliant Queen Zenobia; and the Central Roman Empire, trying desperately to hold itself together. For the first time in centuries, Rome's map looked fragile. The eternal empire suddenly felt mortal. And yet, even in this chaos, a few strong leaders emerged. One of them was Aurelian, 270 to 275 CE, known as the Restorer of the World. In just 5 years, he reunited the fractured empire, defeated invading tribes, and rebuilt confidence in Rome. But even Aurelian couldn't fix everything. The economy remained broken, the borders were still under attack, and political assassinations never really stopped. Rome was alive, but barely. Let's pause for a moment. Imagine standing in a Roman forum during this period. The marble columns are cracked. The streets feel quieter than before. Merchants whisper about rising prices. Soldiers pass by, armored but weary. A group of children plays in the distance, their laughter soft but fragile. There's a strange tension in the air, as if everyone knows something isn't right. Rome is still here, yes, but the confidence, the pride, the sense of eternal glory, it's fading.
So why did Rome nearly collapse during this century? Historians point to several reasons. Political instability. Too many emperors, too little unity. Military chaos. Armies fighting each other instead of defending borders. Economic failure. Inflation, poverty, and failing trade. External invasions, tribes and empires pressing Rome from all sides. Natural disasters, famine and disease weakening the population. In truth, it wasn't just one problem. It was everything happening at the same time.
By the late 3rd century CE, thanks to Aurelian and later Diocletian, Rome managed to survive this nightmare. But the cost was heavy. The empire was weaker, poorer, and more divided than ever before. The seeds of its eventual fall had been planted. Rome had stared into the abyss, and though it stepped back, the shadows never really left. The crisis of the 3rd century nearly destroyed Rome. In just 50 years, the empire saw more than 20 emperors, countless civil wars, foreign invasions, famine, plague, and economic collapse. Yet somehow, Rome survived, bruised, battered, and humbled, but alive. In the next chapter, we'll see how new leaders like Diocletian tried to rebuild the empire by dividing it into East and West, a decision that would shape Rome's destiny forever. For now, though, we leave Rome here, exhausted, shaken, but still standing. For now. The year is 284 CE. Rome has survived the crisis of the 3rd century, but just barely. The empire is exhausted. Its armies are scattered, its economy is broken, and its people are weary after decades of chaos. Rome needs a savior, someone strong enough to hold it together, yet clever enough to rebuild what's falling apart. That savior arrives in the form of a soldier-turned-emperor, Diocletian. Diocletian wasn't born into wealth or privilege. He came from a modest family in what is now Croatia, rising through the military ranks with discipline, loyalty, and a sharp mind for strategy. When he became emperor in 284 CE, he faced an empire on the edge. The borders were under constant attack. The treasury was nearly empty. Inflation was destroying the economy. And the throne? Well, let's just say no one kept it warm for long. Diocletian understood something many before him didn't. The empire was simply too big for one man to control. In 285 CE, Diocletian made a bold move, one that would change Rome forever. He divided the empire into two parts: the Western Roman Empire, with its capital in Milan, later Ravenna, and the Eastern Roman Empire, with its capital in Nicomedia, later Constantinople. It wasn't a breakup. Not yet. The idea was simple. Two emperors working together could govern better than one. But Diocletian didn't stop there. In 293 CE, Diocletian created a system called the Tetrarchy, meaning rule of four. Here's how it worked. There would be two senior emperors called Augusti and two junior emperors called Caesars. Each emperor ruled a different region, handling local problems quickly instead of waiting for Rome to respond months later. It was brilliant on paper. Faster decision-making, stronger defense at the borders, shared responsibility between rulers. But there was one small problem: ambition. At first, the Tetrarchy worked beautifully. The borders stabilized, trade recovered, and for a while, people could breathe again. But human nature is predictable. 4 emperors, 4 egos, 1 empire. Over time, rivalries formed. Each Augustus wanted more influence, each Caesar wanted promotion. And when Diocletian eventually stepped down in 305 CE, his carefully balanced system began to wobble like a cart with a broken wheel. While Diocletian reorganized Rome's leadership, another shift was happening, one that would change the empire's center of power forever. The eastern provinces, Greece, Asia Minor, Egypt, were wealthier and more stable than the West. Trade routes connected them to Persia, India, and even China. Diocletian noticed this and strengthened the East, building infrastructure and fortifications. But it was his successor, Constantine the Great, who made the defining move. In 330 CE, Constantine established a new imperial capital in the East, Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. Built on the ancient city of Byzantium, Constantinople was surrounded by water, making it easy to defend, perfectly located between Europe and Asia, a hub for trade, wealth, and culture. Constantinople would go on to outlast Rome itself, becoming the heart of the Eastern Roman Empire, or, as we now call it, the Byzantine Empire. Diocletian wasn't just a divider, he was a reformer. Economic reforms. To fight inflation, he issued the Edict on Maximum Prices in 301 CE. It tried to set fixed prices for goods and services across the empire. The idea sounded great, but merchants weren't happy, and black markets thrived anyway. Military reforms. He reorganized the army, creating smaller, more flexible units to defend the borders. Soldiers were stationed strategically, ready to respond faster to invasions. Administrative reforms. Diocletian increased the number of provinces and grouped them into larger dioceses, which, fun fact, is where we get the word diocese, still used today. These changes helped stabilize Rome for a while. One of the most controversial parts of Diocletian's reign was his relationship with Christianity. In the early 4th century, Christians were a growing minority in the empire, and Diocletian viewed them with suspicion. In 303 CE, he launched the Great Persecution, ordering churches destroyed and Christian texts burned. It was one of the harshest persecutions in Roman history, but ironically, it backfired. Christianity only grew stronger, and just a few decades later, under Constantine, it would become the empire's official religion. Another sign that Rome was entering a new era, one that looked very different from its pagan past. Diocletian believed his reforms would save the empire, and in many ways, they did, at least temporarily. His division of East and West gave Rome breathing room. The Tetrarchy created short-term stability, and strengthening the East set the stage for Constantinople's rise. But his decisions also had unintended consequences. The East grew richer, while the West grew weaker. Power struggles between emperors became more common, and the empire was no longer a single, unified force. Rome survived Diocletian's era, but it was no longer the same Rome. If you were living in the empire around 305 CE, you might not have noticed the shift immediately. Life still went on. Markets bustled, bathhouses filled with laughter, the Colosseum roared with crowds. But something subtle had changed. Power had begun drifting eastward. The empire wasn't one heart beating anymore, it was two, sometimes four, pulling in different directions. This division, quiet at first, would shape everything that followed. Diocletian stepped down from power in 305 CE, retiring to a villa on the Dalmatian coast, one of the rare Roman emperors to leave the throne alive. He spent his final years gardening and enjoying the sea breeze, far from the chaos of politics. But the system he created would outlive him, and so would its consequences. Rome had been reborn, yes, but also rewired. The East was rising, the West was vulnerable, and the seeds of future conflicts had already been planted. In the next chapter, we'll see how these tensions grew as Constantine the Great rises to power, Christianity reshapes the empire, and the balance between East and West shifts even further. For tonight, though, we leave Rome at a crossroads. Still powerful, still shining, but no longer one. The year is 306 CE. The Roman Empire stands at a crossroads. Diocletian has retired, leaving behind his grand experiment, the Tetrarchy, the rule of four. It was supposed to bring stability. Instead, it brought rivalry. Ambition burned brighter than unity. Generals fought for power, armies switched loyalties, and the throne changed hands again and again. In the middle of this chaos, one man began to rise, a man whose name would change Roman history forever. His name was Constantine. Constantine wasn't born into power. He was the son of a Roman officer, spending much of his early life on military campaigns. But he was clever, charismatic, and, perhaps most importantly, lucky. In 306 CE, after the death of his father, Constantine's soldiers proclaimed him emperor. But there was a problem. 4 other men also claimed the same title. The empire descended into another power struggle. For years, Constantine fought rival emperors across Europe. And then, in 312 CE, he faced his most famous battle, the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. The night before the battle, legend says Constantine had a vision. He saw a shining cross in the sky, along with the words, "In this sign you will conquer." Taking it as a divine message, Constantine ordered his soldiers to paint the Christian symbol, the Chi Rho, on their shields. The next day, Constantine's army triumphed, defeating his rival, Maxentius. To Constantine, this victory wasn't just military, it was spiritual. and it marked the beginning of a new Rome. In 313 CE, Constantine and his co-emperor Licinius issued the Edict of Milan. For the first time in Roman history, Christianity was legalized. No more secret gatherings in hidden rooms, no more fear of persecution. Christians could now worship freely, build churches, and openly practice their faith. This decision changed everything. For centuries, Rome had been a deeply pagan empire. Its temples, festivals, and traditions honored dozens of gods, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and many more. Now suddenly, Christianity was stepping into the spotlight. Constantine didn't make Christianity the empire's official religion, not yet, but he supported it heavily. He funded the construction of great churches, including the original St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. He gave privileges and land to the Christian clergy. He even called the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, where bishops gathered to define key Christian beliefs. But this shift wasn't smooth. Many Romans resisted the changes, clinging to the old gods and traditions. Imagine walking through Rome's Forum during this time. On one side, Christian converts gathered to sing hymns and discuss their faith. On the other, pagan priests light incense at ancient temples, refusing to abandon centuries of worship. The empire was no longer spiritually united, and not everyone agreed with the new direction. While religion reshaped Roman life, Constantine had another vision: a new capital for the empire. Rome, the Eternal City, had been the heart of the empire for centuries. But Constantine saw problems. It was overcrowded and polluted. The Senate still held influence there, which made politics messy. And, most importantly, it was far from the empire's wealthiest and most strategic eastern provinces. So, in 330 CE, Constantine founded a new imperial capital on the site of the ancient city of Byzantium. He called it Nova Roma, New Rome, but soon everyone just called it Constantinople. Constantinople was unlike any city Rome had ever built. Surrounded by water on three sides, it was easy to defend. It sat at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, perfectly placed for trade and travel. Constantine filled the city with palaces, forums, and churches. He even built a massive hippodrome for chariot races, rivaling anything in Rome itself. Over time, Constantinople would become the beating heart of the Eastern Roman Empire, richer, stronger, and more secure than the old capital ever was. Rome was still important, but Constantinople was the future. If you were a Roman citizen living through these years, you'd probably feel conflicted. Rome still looked like Rome, temples, forums, and bathhouses filled with life. But underneath, the empire was transforming. A new religion was rising. A new capital was emerging, and power was slowly shifting eastward. Some saw this as progress, a rebirth for Rome. Others feared it meant the old ways were dying forever. And in a sense, they were. Constantine ruled until 337 CE, leaving behind a transformed empire. His achievements were monumental. He stabilized Rome after decades of chaos. He legalized Christianity, shaping Europe's future. He founded Constantinople, creating a second heart for the empire. But he also left behind tensions. The divide between pagans and Christians deepened. The shift of power from Rome to Constantinople weakened the West, and future emperors would struggle to balance tradition with change. Constantine's Rome was not the same Rome Augustus had built. It was something new, something different, and not everyone was ready for it.
By the mid-4th century, Rome felt like an empire with two identities. The West, rooted in old traditions, Latin culture, and pagan festivals. The East, wealthy, Greek-speaking, and increasingly Christian.
It was still one empire on the map, but in spirit, Rome was slowly splitting in two. This quiet transformation would shape everything that came next, from politics to religion to Rome's eventual decline in the West. The year is 370 CE. The Roman Empire still stands, its marble cities shining under the Mediterranean sun. Inside the walls, life feels safe. Markets are lively, theaters are full, and the great roads are busy with merchants and travelers. But far beyond those roads, out in the cold forests and endless plains of Europe, a storm is forming. And it's getting closer. For centuries, the Romans called anyone beyond their northern frontiers barbarians. It wasn't always meant as an insult, it simply meant not Roman. But to the people living there, the Germanic tribes, Rome wasn't just a neighbor, it was a giant. These tribes had their own rich cultures, leaders, and traditions. Among them were the Visigoths, farmers and warriors from the forests near the Danube. The Vandals, fierce raiders known for speed and mobility. The Franks, clever and ambitious, living along the Rhine. The Saxons, skilled seafarers from the north. And many others, Alemanni, Burgundians, Suebi, dozens of independent peoples. For hundreds of years, Rome and these tribes had lived in a delicate balance. Sometimes they traded, sometimes they fought, and sometimes Rome even hired these barbarians as soldiers. But now that balance was breaking. Somewhere deep in the endless grasslands of Central Asia, a new force began to rise: the Huns. No one in Rome knew much about them at first. They were mysterious, fast-moving, and unstoppable. Nomadic horsemen who seemed to appear out of nowhere, striking without warning, then vanishing again like smoke in the wind. By the late 4th century, the Huns pushed westward, invading lands along the Danube River. The Germanic tribes who lived there suddenly faced a terrible choice: stay and be destroyed, or flee straight into Roman territory. Imagine standing on the northern frontier of the empire, near the river Danube. The air is cold, the forests are silent, until you hear it, the distant rumble of thousands of footsteps. Entire nations are moving, men, women, children, and elders, carrying what little they can. Wooden carts creak under the weight of belongings. Horses snort in the frosty air, and frightened faces glance constantly over their shoulders toward the Huns. In 376 CE, the Visigoths, desperate and hungry, arrived at the Roman border, pleading for safe passage. They were allowed to cross into the empire, but things quickly spiraled out of control. Roman officials exploited them, demanding bribes for food, withholding supplies, and pushing them to starvation. Resentment grew, tension built, and then violence erupted. In 378 CE, the Visigoths rose up against the Romans, and the two armies met near the city of Adrianople. The Roman Emperor Valens believed he could crush the rebels quickly. He was wrong. On a scorching August day, Roman legions marched confidently into battle. But the Visigoths, fighting for survival, surrounded them. The result was a massive Roman defeat. Emperor Valens himself was killed, and 2/3 of his army was wiped out. For the first time in centuries, the unthinkable had happened. A barbarian army had destroyed a full Roman legion on Roman soil. The shockwaves spread across the empire like thunder. After Adrianople, the empire could no longer ignore the threat. The borders were no longer secure. Refugees flooded Roman lands, bringing both labor and chaos. Roman cities struggled to feed and house the newcomers. Some tribes became allies, serving as foederae, special groups allowed to live inside the empire in exchange for military service. But others resisted Roman control, forming their own kingdoms inside Roman territory. The balance of power was shifting. The Franks, living along the Rhine, were quick to see opportunity. Some allied with Rome, earning land and titles in exchange for protecting the frontier. The Vandals, on the other hand, moved south, crossing into Gaul and eventually into Spain. Restless and determined, they didn't stop there. Their journey would one day take them all the way to North Africa. Other tribes, the Burgundians, Alemanni, and Suebi, carved out territories of their own, slowly chipping away at Roman authority. For centuries, Rome had seen itself as the master of Europe. Now, that control was slipping. Imagine being a Roman citizen living in northern Italy around this time. By day, the markets still bustle, children still play in the streets, life looks normal. But at night, when the streets grow quiet, rumors spread. The Visigoths are moving south. The Vandals have crossed into Spain. The Franks are pushing deeper into Gaul. Every whisper carries the same underlying fear. The barbarians are coming. And yet, inside the city walls, people try to carry on as if nothing has changed, because what else can they do? The Roman army was still powerful, but stretched thin. Defending the empire's massive borders was nearly impossible. Troops were scattered across Britain, Gaul, Spain, North Africa, and the Balkans. Generals fought over resources and loyalty, and Roman citizens themselves were increasingly reluctant to serve, leaving the empire more dependent on barbarian soldiers. Rome was using the very people it feared most to defend itself. It was a risky strategy, and everyone knew it. By the end of the 4th century, the empire was holding, but only just. Inside the walls, Rome still glittered, its temples standing tall and its streets alive with trade. But beyond the frontiers, a mass migration was underway. Tribes moved, clashed, and merged. The Huns kept pushing, and every year, Rome's borders felt a little weaker, a little thinner, a little more exposed. It was like standing on a beach, watching the tide creep closer, one wave at a time. For now, the empire still stands. The roads are open, the markets are full, and the legions still march under the Roman eagle. But just beyond the forests, just past the rivers, the storm gathers strength. The Visigoths, the Vandals, the Franks, the Huns. They are moving, slowly, steadily, inevitably. Rome doesn't know it yet, but the world is about to change forever. In the next chapter, we'll reach one of the darkest moments in Roman history when the unthinkable happens, the sack of Rome. For tonight, though, we leave the empire standing, strong on the outside, but with distant thunder rolling on the horizon. The year is 410 CE. Rome, the eternal city, has stood for over 800 years. Its walls have never been breached. Its name alone once struck fear into the hearts of kings and tribes across the world. But tonight, everything changes. For the first time in centuries, Rome is about to fall, not to some distant enemy, but to a people once allowed inside its borders, the Visigoths. At the center of this storm stands Alaric, king of the Visigoths. Once a Roman ally, Alaric served in the Roman army and fought alongside its legions. But years of broken promises, unpaid debts, and constant mistreatment pushed him and his people away from loyalty. By 408 CE, Alaric had had enough. He gathered his warriors, tens of thousands strong, and marched toward the empire's heart. For 2 long years, his army camped outside Rome, cutting off supplies and starving the city into desperation. Inside the walls, panic grew. And then, on the night of August 24th, 410 CE, the gates of Rome opened. No one knows exactly who opened the gates. Some say it was treachery. Others whisper it was desperation. What we know is this: when the Visigoths entered, they came like a flood. Imagine standing in the silent streets of Rome that night. The air is thick and heavy. Far away you hear footsteps, thousands of them. Shields clatter softly, horses snort in the darkness. Then shouting, doors break open, fires spark. For centuries, Rome believed its walls would keep it safe. That illusion died that night. Inside the city, chaos spreads like smoke. Citizens lock their doors, clutching their families close. Rich senators bury treasures beneath their homes, hoping to save them from the looters. Priests gather in temples, whispering frantic prayers to gods who suddenly feel very far away. Some try to flee through the city gates, but the streets are already clogged. Others hide in basements and catacombs, praying to be forgotten in the shadows. The fear is not loud. It is quiet. It's the kind of fear where even crying feels dangerous. Soon, flames begin to rise. Temples, villas, and marketplaces catch fire as chaos spreads through the streets. The glow of burning rooftops reflects in the Tiber River, turning its waters red and gold under the dark sky. Sparks drift into the night like falling stars. But there are no wishes tonight, only survival. While some parts of the city are spared, including St. Peter's Basilica, where many fled for safety, others are gutted completely. Ancient homes crumble. Treasures gathered over centuries vanish in a matter of hours. Rome, once the master of the world, now feels helpless. This wasn't just the sack of a city. This was the shattering of an idea. For centuries, Rome had been untouchable. Its name carried power far beyond its walls. Even when the empire faced invasions, civil wars, and plagues, the city itself always stood. But now, in the year 410 CE, Rome had fallen, not to a great empire or rival, but to a migrating tribe that once begged for Roman protection. Across the empire, people whispered the same haunting question: if Rome can fall, what hope is left for the rest of us? It's important to understand something about Alaric. He didn't set out to destroy Rome. He didn't burn the entire city to the ground or slaughter everyone inside. For him, this was about recognition. He wanted land, dignity, and security for his people. But his warriors, hungry and angry after years of mistreatment, looted freely. Gold, silver, and priceless artifacts vanished overnight. Ancient monuments cracked under the weight of fire and chaos. Rome survived, but it was changed forever. When the Visigoths finally left the city after 3 days, silence settled over Rome like a heavy fog. The streets were littered with broken statues, burnt beans, and scattered belongings. Families wandered aimlessly, searching for missing loved ones. Merchants returned to find their shops empty, their goods stolen or destroyed. And above it all, the once proud Roman Senate sat in shock, unable to process what had happened. Rome had not just lost its wealth, it had lost its confidence. News of the sack spread across the empire like wildfire. In the eastern capital of Constantinople, people gasped in disbelief. In Gaul and Britain, Roman citizens whispered nervously, wondering if their cities would be next. The empire's enemies, Vandals, Franks, Saxons, and others, now knew the unthinkable was possible. Rome could be beaten. And Rome itself knew it too. That realization cut deeper than any sword. Imagine walking through Rome in the weeks after the sack. The air still smells faintly of smoke. Marble pillars lie cracked in the streets. Abandoned sandals, broken pottery, and torn scrolls are scattered among the rubble. You pass a temple, its doors charred, its altar stripped bare. A once busy marketplace now stands silent, save for the soft creak of wooden signs swaying in the wind. The eternal city doesn't feel eternal anymore. It feels fragile, mortal. The sack of 410 CE didn't destroy Rome completely, but it destroyed something deeper: belief. The Roman people had built their identity around power, control, and destiny. To them, Rome was the center of the world, the city of the gods, the beating heart of civilization. Now that heart had been pierced. The myth of Rome's invincibility was gone. And while the empire would limp on for decades more, this moment marked the beginning of the end. For 3 days in 410 CE, the Visigoths walked the streets of Rome. They came not as visitors, but as conquerors. And when they left, they carried away more than gold and treasures. They carried away Rome's sense of eternity. The eternal city had been touched, breached, and scarred. In the next chapter, we'll look at how Rome struggled to recover, facing economic collapse, political weakness, and rising enemies on all sides. Because after 410 CE, nothing would ever be the same again. For tonight, though, we leave Rome beneath a smoke-filled sky, its streets silent, its people broken, and its confidence gone. The year is 410 CE. The Visigoths have left Rome, but their footsteps still echo in its empty streets. The fires are out, the smoke has faded, yet the damage runs far deeper than broken walls and stolen treasures. Because Rome's greatest wound isn't on the surface, it's in its economy. The eternal city still stands, but its financial heart is faltering. Trade is slowing, wealth is draining, and the empire's once thriving markets are growing silent. The greatest empire the world had ever seen is running out of breath. Running Rome had never been cheap. The empire stretched across 3 continents, from the misty hills of Britain to the deserts of Egypt, from the forests of Gaul to the mountains of Asia Minor. Keeping it all connected and protected demanded money. Lots of it. Thousands of miles of roads needed repairs. Forts and watchtowers guarded endless frontiers. Massive armies patrolled the borders, demanding regular pay. And the imperial court spent fortunes maintaining its palaces, monuments, and festivals. For centuries, Rome could afford it. Conquests brought new lands, new wealth, and millions of enslaved laborers. Gold flowed into the city like water. But by the 5th century, that river of wealth had become a trickle. The Mediterranean, once called Mare Nostrum, our sea, used to be Rome's beating heart. Merchants sailed constantly, moving wine from Spain, grain from Egypt, silks from the East, and spices from India. But after the sack of 410 CE, trade slowed. The routes were no longer safe. Pirates prowled the sea, seizing ships. Germanic tribes disrupted overland roads, and Rome itself could no longer guarantee secure passage. Imagine standing in a Roman port, once filled with sails and shouting merchants. Now the docks are quieter. Fewer ships arrive. The warehouses feel half empty, their doors creaking in the salty breeze. Without steady trade, Rome's economy, once so vast and alive, began to wither. For centuries, Rome had built its economy on slave labor. Conquered lands brought thousands of enslaved workers who fueled farms, built roads, and kept the cities running. But as Rome stopped expanding, the supply of new slaves declined. And when the Visigoths, Vandals, and other tribes carved up former Roman territories, many slave routes disappeared entirely. Farms slowed production. Workshops stood quiet. Even maintaining basic infrastructure became harder. Rome had designed its entire system assuming it would always have a constant flow of free labor. Without it, the foundation cracked. With trade declining and labor collapsing, Rome turned to the only option left: taxes. Taxes had always been part of life in the empire, but by the 5th century, they became crushing. Landowners were taxed heavily to fund the military. Merchants paid steep fees just to move goods. Farmers gave up large shares of their crops, leaving little for their families. At first, citizens tried to keep up, but as the demands grew, many simply gave up their land and fled to the countryside, escaping tax collectors and debts. Ironically, higher taxes brought in less money. The empire was suffocating itself in desperation. To make matters worse, the empire's currency collapsed. For centuries, Roman coins had been made of gold and silver, trusted and valued across the known world. But during the economic crisis, emperors began reducing the precious metal content to mint more coins. The result? Prices soared. Wages became meaningless. People stopped trusting Roman money altogether. In many regions, barter replaced currency. Farmers traded grain for tools, cloth for oil, and wine for livestock. The empire's proud monetary system, once a symbol of stability, became worthless. Imagine walking through the Forum Romanum, the great marketplace at the heart of the city. Once, it was alive with the sounds of merchants shouting, coins clinking, and carts rumbling over stone streets. Now the energy feels different. Fewer stalls are open, exotic spices from the east are missing. Luxury goods that once dazzled the wealthy have vanished. Instead, you see small groups haggling quietly over bread and oil, their faces drawn with worry. The grand fountains still flow, the statues still stand, but the heart of the city beats slower. The silence is unsettling, like watching a great river dry into a stream. As the economy weakened, Rome's enemies grew stronger. Germanic tribes moved deeper into Roman lands, the Huns pushed westward, and the Vandals began threatening vital grain supplies from North Africa. Defending the empire cost more than ever, but paying soldiers was difficult, and recruiting new ones nearly impossible. In desperation, Rome increasingly relied on barbarian mercenaries, the same tribes it feared. Some fought well, others, well, had their own agendas. The empire was spending money it didn't have, trusting people it didn't control, to protect borders it could barely defend. For ordinary citizens, the changes were impossible to ignore. Food became expensive and scarce. Jobs disappeared as trade and farming slowed. Inflation devoured savings overnight, and people whispered constantly about the empire's future, something they once thought unshakable. Some families abandoned the cities altogether, retreating to small villages for survival. Others stayed, clinging to the fading hope that Rome would recover. But deep down, many sensed a quiet truth. Rome was shrinking, not just in power, but in spirit. The empire feels smaller. The Rome of old, the empire that once conquered continents, now struggled to manage itself. Provinces broke away. Tax revenues collapsed. Local governors grew more independent, ruling as they pleased. In many ways, the empire was still Rome in name, but the reality was different. It no longer felt like a single united power. By the early 5th century, the decline was no longer a distant worry. It was daily life. Picture walking home through the narrow streets of Rome at dusk. Shadows stretch across cracked stone walls. A baker closes his empty stall early. Children chase each other barefoot, their laughter thin against the heavy silence. Somewhere, you hear a distant shout. Another tax collector arguing with a frustrated merchant. The city still breathes, but the air feels heavy, tired. It's not collapse all at once. It's slower, quieter, like a candle burning down to its wick. By the mid-5th century, Rome's wealth was fading, its economy fractured beyond repair. Trade had slowed to a crawl. The once steady supply of slaves had dried up. Taxes crushed citizens, yet the treasury stayed empty. Markets that once overflowed with color, sound, and life now felt hollow and fragile. The eternal city still stood, but its foundations were crumbling. In the next chapter, we'll see how these economic struggles deepened the divide between the Eastern and Western Roman empires, and why the West was beginning to fall far behind. For tonight, though, we leave Rome under a fading sunset, its markets quiet, its coins worthless, and its people caught between survival and despair. The year is 450 CE. Rome, the great capital of the West, still stands, but it is no longer the center of the Roman world. Far to the east, across the sparkling waters of the Aegean, another city now shines brighter: Constantinople. Two capitals, two empires, one name, but two very different realities. The Roman Empire was still technically one empire, but in truth, it was slowly splitting in two. In the east, the empire was thriving. Constantinople stood like a jewel, wealthy and secure, its walls unbroken and its markets overflowing. In the west, Rome struggled under heavy debts, crumbling infrastructure, and constant invasions. It was the same empire on paper, but in spirit, they were drifting apart. Let's begin in the east, where the empire's new heart beats. Constantinople, founded by Constantine the Great in 330 CE, was perfectly placed. It sat at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. It controlled major trade routes between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Its harbors teemed with ships from Greece, Egypt, Persia, and beyond. Step into Constantinople's bustling marketplace and you'd hear dozens of languages mixing in the air. Merchants traded silks from China, spices from India, gold from Africa, and wine from Greece. Its streets were clean and organized, lined with mosaics and marble columns. Magnificent churches and palaces rose above the skyline, their domes gleaming in the sunlight. Inside the mighty walls, some of the strongest in the ancient world, people lived in relative safety and comfort. The East had wealth, stability, and confidence. Now, step into Rome, the old capital of the West. Here, things looked very different. Markets that once overflowed with exotic goods now struggled to stay open. Shops stood empty, their wooden shutters worn and cracked. Fountains ran dry in some districts, aqueducts unrepaired for years. The streets, once filled with the sounds of trade and celebration, felt quieter, emptier. Rome was still beautiful in many ways. Its monuments and temples still stood as reminders of former glory, but they were like fading photographs. The energy, the wealth, the power, much of it was gone. The Eastern Empire thrived for several reasons. Geography. Its cities were better protected, surrounded by mountains, seas, and strong fortifications. Trade. Its position connected the Mediterranean to Asia, bringing in vast wealth. Population. Eastern provinces were denser, with thriving cities like Antioch, Alexandria, and Ephesus feeding Constantinople's economy. Leadership. Eastern emperors often managed their finances more carefully and invested in defense. Constantinople could afford strong walls, professional soldiers, and a steady food supply. Roma could not. Meanwhile, the Western Empire faced problems it couldn't escape. Constant invasions, Visigoths, Vandals, Franks, Saxons, and Huns all pressed against its borders. Economic collapse. Trade routes were disrupted, taxes were unbearable, and Roman coins lost their value. Shrinking population, plagues, famine, and migration left many cities half empty. Weak leadership, frequent assassinations and civil wars left little time for rebuilding. In many ways, the West was bleeding slowly, not from one fatal wound, but from 1,000 small cuts. Beyond wealth and security, another division grew: culture. In the West, people clung to Latin, Roman traditions, and old pagan festivals, even as Christianity spread slowly across the population. In the East, Greek became the dominant language, shaping literature, philosophy, and government. Christianity grew stronger here too, supported by emperors and embraced by scholars and citizens alike. Over time, the two halves of the empire began to think differently. The East valued scholarship, theology, and central control. The West focused on military survival and clung to fading traditions. It wasn't just a political split anymore. It was becoming a cultural one too. Even at the highest levels, tensions simmered between East and West. Western leaders expected help defending their territories, but the East often prioritized protecting its own borders and wealth. Eastern emperors saw the West as draining resources without giving much back. This resentment deepened over time, and while they were still one empire, each side increasingly acted independently. Imagine this. In Constantinople, the harbor buzzes with life. Ships unload crates of gold, silks, and spices. Priests gather in grand churches. Scholars debate philosophy, and merchants argue over the price of olive oil. The streets are bright and full of laughter. Now, cross over to Rome. The harbor is quiet. The once busy marketplaces are smaller, their stalls selling fewer goods. Senators wear fine robes, but their palaces are slowly crumbling. Citizens whisper about higher taxes, missing food shipments, and rumors of barbarian raids. It feels like two different worlds, and yet they still call themselves one empire. Meanwhile, the Western Empire faced problems it couldn't escape. Constant invasions, Visigoths, Vandals, Franks, Saxons, and Huns all pressed against its borders. Economic collapse. Trade routes were disrupted, taxes were unbearable, and Roman coins lost their value. Shrinking population, plagues, famine, and migration left many cities half empty. Weak leadership, frequent assassinations and civil wars left little time for rebuilding. In many ways, the West was bleeding slowly, not from one fatal wound, but from 1,000 small cuts. A sense of resentment. As the gap widened, resentment grew on both sides. Romans in the West began to feel abandoned by the East, accusing Constantinople of hoarding wealth and refusing to send soldiers when needed. In the East, people quietly mocked the old Rome, seeing it as weak, outdated, and poor. The shared pride that once united the empire was slowly replaced by mutual frustration. Ironically, even as the Western Empire resented the East, it became increasingly dependent on it. Constantinople sent grain shipments to feed starving Roman citizens. Eastern armies sometimes helped defend against invaders. Eastern gold occasionally funded the West's crumbling defenses. But each time the West leaned on the East, the imbalance deepened and the West's weakness became harder to ignore. By the mid-5th century, the Western Roman Empire was a shadow of its former self. Rome's economy struggled, its military weakened, and its confidence shaken. The Eastern Roman Empire, on the other hand, entered what some call a golden age. Constantinople's walls stood strong, its markets thrived, and its emperors ruled with authority. From the outside, it still looked like one great empire. But in reality, there were two very different Romes now, and one of them was slowly dying. By 450 CE, the empire's heart had shifted eastward. Constantinople glittered with wealth, trade, and security, while Rome, once the center of the known world, faded into quiet struggle. Two capitals, two identities, two futures. The division wasn't official yet, but the distance between them was growing every day, culturally, politically, and economically. In the next chapter, we'll see a new storm gathering on the horizon, a rider sweeping in from the east, bringing fear to every corner of the empire. Attila the Hun. For tonight, though, we leave Rome and Constantinople beneath the same fading sunset. Two halves of one empire, pulling farther and farther apart. The year is 434 CE. In the quiet streets of Rome and Constantinople, life still moves on. Markets open, temples stand, and the empire tries to hold itself together. But far beyond the walls, out on the endless grasslands of the East, something stirs. A rider approaches, and with him comes fear. His name is Attila. History will call him the Scourge of God. The Huns had always been a mystery to the Romans. They came from the wide, endless steppes of Central Asia, a people born in the saddle, moving faster than any army Rome had ever faced. They lived on horseback, hunting, raiding, and striking without warning. To the settled civilizations of Europe, they seemed almost inhuman. Fierce warriors who appeared like ghosts on the horizon, looted and vanished before anyone could respond. At first, the Huns were just whispers, stories traded along Roman frontiers. But whispers became warnings. Warnings became panic. And then, in 434 CE, Attila became their king. Attila ruled alongside his brother, Bleda, at first, sharing power. Together, they were formidable, but Attila's ambition was unmatched. He wanted more than raids. He wanted tribute, dominance, and fear. The Eastern Roman Empire, wealthy and secure behind Constantinople's mighty walls, became his first target. In 447 CE, Attila's army swept through the Balkans, burning towns, capturing cities, and leaving devastation behind. Roman defenses crumbled before his speed and ferocity. Entire villages emptied overnight, their people fleeing westward in terror. In Constantinople, panic spread as refugees poured in from the countryside. People whispered about horsemen with no mercy, about cities reduced to ashes, about fields left empty under clouds of smoke. The Eastern Emperor, Theodosius II, realized fighting Attila directly was nearly impossible, so he tried something else: money. Rome agreed to pay the Huns huge sums of gold each year in exchange for peace. For a time, it worked. But peace bought with gold is fragile.
When the Eastern Empire tried to resist further payments, Attila turned his gaze westward, toward Gaul, toward Italy, and toward Rome itself. By now, Attila was no longer just a warlord. He was a legend. Roman writers described him as short, broad-shouldered, with piercing eyes that saw everything and forgave nothing. He commanded an army said to number in the hundreds of thousands, warriors from dozens of tribes united under his banner. Everywhere he went, fear traveled faster than his soldiers.
The Huns had always been a mystery to the Romans. They came from the wide, endless steppes of Central Asia, a people born in the saddle, moving faster than any army Rome had ever faced. They lived on horseback, hunting, raiding, and striking without warning. To the settled civilizations of Europe, they seemed almost inhuman. Fierce warriors who appeared like ghosts on the horizon, looted and vanished before anyone could respond. At first, the Huns were just whispers, stories traded along Roman frontiers. But whispers became warnings. Warnings became panic. And then, in 434 CE, Attila became their king. The very next year, in 452 CE, Attila invaded Italy. Northern cities fell one by one. Aquileia, Milan, Verona, their people scattered, their treasures stolen. Refugees fled south, filling the roads toward Rome, carrying nothing but fear and the clothes on their backs. In Rome itself, panic spread like wildfire. Some fled to the countryside. Others prayed in churches, asking for divine protection. Every rumor sounded worse than the last. The Huns are at the gates. The empire is finished. And then came one of the most famous encounters in Roman history. As Attila marched toward Rome, Pope Leo I rode out to meet him in 452 CE. What they said to each other is lost to time. Some believe the Pope offered gold and peace. Others claim he warned Attila of divine punishment if he attacked the holy city. Whatever was said, something unexpected happened. Attila turned back. Rome was spared, for now. Even though Attila never sacked Rome, his presence left scars deeper than any fire or sword could cause. For years, people would wake in the night imagining the distant sound of hooves thundering across the plains. Parents told children stories of the scourge of God, warning them to pray, behave, and stay safe. Every whisper, every rumor, every distant column of smoke on the horizon reminded the empire that no one was safe anymore. In 453 CE, Attila's story came to an unexpected end. On the night of his wedding, after celebrating with his new bride, he died suddenly, likely from a burst blood vessel. The scourge of God, the terror of Europe, was gone in an instant. Without his leadership, the Huns' empire fractured quickly. Tribes scattered, leaders fought among themselves, and the once united horde faded back into the steppes. Rome had survived Attila, but the damage he caused would never fully heal. Imagine being a Roman citizen during these years. You sit by a quiet fire at night, but sleep won't come easily. Every creak of wood, every gust of wind, every distant thunderclap sounds like hooves in the dark. The Huns had passed, but the fear stayed behind. It spread like a shadow, lingering over fields, villages, and cities long after Attila was gone. Rome had faced many enemies before, but none had left such an echo. Attila's raids didn't destroy the Roman Empire outright, but they shattered its confidence. Cities were abandoned, farms lay in ruins, entire regions lost their populations, and the treasury bled dry, paying ransoms and tributes. The Western Empire, already fragile, became weaker than ever, and the Eastern Empire, though wealthier, had learned an important lesson. Not even Constantinople's walls could guarantee safety forever. By 453 CE, Attila was dead, but the memory of his campaigns haunted the empire. The Romans called him the Scourge of God, believing his invasion was punishment for their sins. The empire had survived him, but just barely. In the next chapter, we turn to the final act of Rome's Western story, as weak emperors, endless invasions, and political chaos bring the empire closer to its breaking point. For tonight, though, we leave the Roman world under a quiet, uneasy sky, its people holding their breath, listening for hooves that will never come, but fearing them all the same. The year is 470 CE. Rome still stands, but it is not the Rome it once was. The marble streets are cracked. The forums are quieter. The great Colosseum, once filled with roaring crowds, now hosts fewer games, fewer celebrations, fewer reasons to cheer. The Western Roman Empire is fading, slowly, silently, like the final light of a candle burning low. On maps, Rome still claims vast lands: Italy, Gaul, Spain, and parts of North Africa. But in reality, the empire's reach is shrinking with each passing year. Germanic tribes now control much of Gaul and Spain. The Vandals hold North Africa. The Franks, Saxons, and Visigoths carve out kingdoms where Roman legions once marched proudly. Inside the walls of Rome, senators still debate, laws are still written, and coins are still minted, but the authority behind them is gone. The empire isn't dead yet, but its heartbeat is weak. By the mid-5th century, Roman emperors were no longer the powerful leaders they once were. Real power belonged to military generals, strongmen who controlled armies and chose emperors like pieces on a chessboard. One of the most influential was Flavius Ricimer, a skilled general of mixed Roman and barbarian heritage. He became known as the kingmaker of the Western Empire. Ricimer placed emperors on the throne, removed them when they displeased him, and ruled from the shadows. Between 456 CE and 472 CE, he installed 5 different emperors, none truly in control of their own rule. The Western Empire had become a stage, and the emperors just actors reading lines written by others. This political instability shattered Rome's unity. Every new emperor brought new policies, new alliances, and new conflicts. Senators sided with different generals. Provinces stopped sending taxes and soldiers. Rival Roman armies fought each other while barbarian tribes advanced deeper into Roman lands. Rome was too busy arguing with itself to defend its borders. Each year, its defenses thinned, its treasury drained, and its citizens grew restless.
And then, in 475 CE, came the last emperor of the West, Romulus Augustulus. He was just 14 years old when he was placed on the throne, chosen not for his strength, wisdom, or leadership, but for his usefulness. Romulus was a puppet,
installed by his father, the general Orestes, who believed he could control the empire through his young son. Imagine the scene: a teenage boy dressed in imperial robes, seated on a golden throne, while the real decisions were made by generals in the room behind him. The people called him Augustulus, meaning Little Augustus, a name meant to honor Rome's first emperor, but also a quiet reminder that this boy was no Augustus at all. But Orestes and his young emperor had made a dangerous enemy: Odoacer, a powerful Germanic leader serving in the Roman army. When Orestes refused to grant land to Odoacer's soldiers, rebellion erupted. In 476 CE, Odoacer's forces marched on Ravenna, then the capital of the Western Empire. Orestes was captured and executed. Romulus Augustulus, the boy emperor, was spared, too young, too harmless to kill. Instead, Odoacer stripped him of his crown and sent him into quiet exile. With that single act, the Western Roman Empire ended. There were no great battles that day. No flames, no thunder, no triumphant speeches. Rome didn't fall with a roar. It fell with a whisper. One moment, there was an emperor. The next, there wasn't. The Senate sent the imperial regalia, the symbols of Rome's power, to Constantinople, acknowledging the Eastern emperor as the sole ruler of what was left of Rome. After more than 500 years of emperors, the Western Roman throne stood empty. For ordinary Romans, the end came quietly. Shops still opened. Bakers still baked bread. Children still played in narrow streets. But something subtle had shifted. The idea of Rome, the belief that the empire was eternal, unbreakable, untouchable, was gone. Now they were subjects not of Rome, but of Odoacer, a Germanic king ruling Italy under his own banner. The city that once ruled the world was now just another city. Far away in Constantinople, the Eastern Roman Empire, now often called the Byzantine Empire, continued to thrive. Its emperors ruled over wealth, trade, and power that the West had long since lost. To them, the fall of the West was tragic, yes, but also inevitable. The East would carry the name Roman for another 1,000 years, but the old Rome, the Rome of the Caesars, the Senate, and the legions, was gone. The story of Rome's Western Empire doesn't end with a single moment. It ends slowly, like the fading of light at dusk. The invasions chipped away at its borders, the economy hollowed out its strength, the endless power struggles drained its spirit. By the time Romulus Augustulus was deposed, Rome was already a shadow of itself. His fall was not the cause, it was the confirmation. The candle had been burning low for centuries. In 476 CE, the flame finally flickered and went out. The Western Roman Empire, once the master of the known world, had fallen. Romulus Augustulus, the boy who never truly ruled, walked quietly into history. Odoacer became king, and the old imperial titles disappeared into memory. In the next chapter, we'll witness the final moment, the symbolic fall of Rome itself, and how the West entered the long, uncertain age that would follow. For tonight, though, we leave Rome in silence, its throne empty, its streets quieter than ever, and its once eternal light reduced to a fading glow. The year is 476 CE. For centuries, Rome ruled the known world, its armies unbeaten, its roads endless, its culture unmatched. But now, the eternal city feels quiet,
almost fragile. The Western Roman Empire has been fading for decades. Its borders are broken, its economy hollow, its armies scattered. And in this year, under a silent sky, the Western Empire finally ends. In the imperial palace of Ravenna, by now the Western capital, a boy sits on a throne too large for him. His name is Romulus Augustulus. He is just 14 years old. Once, Rome had emperors like Julius Caesar, Augustus, and Trajan, men whose names shook the world. But Romulus isn't like them. He isn't a conqueror or a visionary. He is a symbol, placed on the throne by his father Orestes, a general who thought he could control the empire through his young son. But Rome is no longer his to control. Outside Ravenna, a man named Odoacer prepares his army. He is a Germanic general serving in the Roman ranks, leading soldiers who are no longer loyal to Rome itself, but to him. Odoacer has one demand: land for his men, who fought and bled for the empire. When Orestes refuses, Odoacer marches on Ravenna. The walls cannot hold. The Roman army, weakened and divided, offers little resistance. Orestes is captured and executed. And then Odoacer turns to the boy emperor. Romulus Augustulus is brought before Odoacer. No grand speeches, no last stand, just a quiet moment between two men, one young and powerless, the other strong and determined. Odoacer looks at him and sees no rival, no threat. Instead of killing him, Odoacer spares his life. Romulus is stripped of his title, his imperial robes removed, his crown taken. The boy who was once called Augustus, after Rome's greatest emperor, is sent into exile to live a quiet life by the Bay of Naples. And with that, the Western Roman Empire has no emperor. There is no great battle this day, no burning of cities, no thunder of collapsing walls. The Western Roman Empire doesn't fall with chaos, it fades into silence. The Senate, realizing its power is gone, sends the imperial regalia, the crown, the purple robes, the symbols of authority, to Constantinople. From now on, the Eastern Emperor is recognized as the sole ruler of the Roman world. In name, Rome still exists. In reality, it has ended. Once, all roads led to Rome. Once, every city bowed to the eternal city's power. But by 476 CE, Rome is no longer the heart of the empire. Power has shifted east to Constantinople. There, the Eastern Roman Empire, later called the Byzantine Empire, thrives, its walls strong, its markets rich, its rulers powerful. In the West, Rome is just another city. Its streets are quieter, its senators irrelevant, its glory a memory carved into fading stone. History often imagines the fall of Rome as thunder and fire, but the truth feels different. It's quieter, more like watching a candle burn lower and lower until at last the flame goes out. Rome doesn't collapse in a single day, it drifts into memory. The marble roads still exist, but fewer travelers walk them. The aqueducts still stand, but some run dry. The Colosseum still towers, but fewer crowds gather beneath its arches. The body of Rome survives, but the soul is gone. For centuries, Romans believed their empire was eternal. They called it Roma Eterna, eternal Rome. And yet, in a single year, the illusion vanished. The Western throne is empty. Its legions no longer march. Provinces once bound together by Roman law now belong to new kings and new kingdoms.
The Visigoths rule in Spain, the Vandals in North Africa, the Franks in Gaul, and Odoacer himself becomes king of Italy. Rome hasn't been destroyed, but the idea of Rome, the dream of one empire, one people, one power, is gone.
Romulus Augustulus was not a great emperor. Some historians even debate whether he should be called an emperor at all. But his deposition matters, not for who he was, but for what it meant. The boy on the throne represented the end of something vast, ancient, and powerful. With him gone, the Western Roman Empire became history. And though Constantinople still carried Rome's name for another 1,000 years, the Rome of the Caesars was no more.
Imagine standing on the Palatine Hill at dusk, looking out over the city. The rooftops glow in fading sunlight. The temples, once bright and alive with worship, stand quieter now. The streets below are not empty, but they feel different. You hear the distant chatter of merchants, the soft laughter of children, the clatter of wooden carts. Life continues, but there is an absence you cannot name, a silence where once there was certainty. For centuries, Rome was the center of the world. Now, the world has moved on. In 476 CE, the Western Roman Empire died not with a scream, but with a sigh. Romulus Augustulus laid down his crown. Odoacer became king of Italy. The Senate sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, quietly acknowledging that Rome's time had passed. The eternal city still stood, but it was no longer eternal in power, only in memory. In the next chapter, we'll reflect on Rome's legacy, how its ideas, laws, architecture, and culture lived on long after the empire itself was gone. For tonight, though, we leave Rome beneath a soft, fading light, its crown gone, its throne empty, and its once great empire now only a story told under the quiet stars. The year is 476 CE. The Western Roman Empire has fallen. The throne is empty. The banners are lowered. The imperial crown has been sent east to Constantinople. And yet, Rome is not truly gone. Because empires may fall, but their echoes remain, shaping the world long after their last emperor is forgotten. Rome's fall wasn't a single sudden collapse. It was a slow fading, like the last light of sunset stretching across the horizon. The Western Empire was gone, yes, but its ideas, its roads, its culture, and its memory lived on. You can still trace Rome's presence in the very foundations of Europe, in stone, in language, and in thought. Rome's body died, its soul never did. One of Rome's greatest gifts to the world was its law. Roman legal principles, fairness, property rights, contracts, citizenship became the foundation for European justice systems centuries later. Concepts like innocent until proven guilty, the right to defend oneself in court, and standardized legal codes trace their roots back to Rome. Even today, in modern courts, fragments of Roman thinking still echo through the halls of justice. The empire may have ended, but its rules became part of civilization itself. Latin, the language of Rome, did not disappear with the empire. In the West, it evolved into the Romance languages we know today: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian. Even English, though Germanic in origin, carries thousands of words rooted in Latin. The language of the Caesars quietly became the language of Europe. For centuries, Latin remained the language of scholars, priests, and philosophers. In monasteries and universities, scrolls and manuscripts kept Rome's words alive long after its armies vanished. Rome's voice still speaks every time we read these languages.
Walk through almost any European city today, and you'll find Rome still standing. The Colosseum, though scarred by time, towers above Rome's streets. The Pantheon, with its massive dome and open oculus, still inspires architects around the world. Roman aqueducts, built thousands of years ago, continue to carry water in some regions. Arches, domes, amphitheaters, and roads, these weren't just constructions, they were ideas. Whenever we step into a modern courthouse, stadium, or government building with towering columns and marble halls, we are, in a way, still walking through Rome.
Perhaps Rome's most unexpected legacy was its role in the spread of Christianity. Once persecuted under emperors like Nero and Diocletian, Christianity eventually became the empire's official religion under Constantine. After the fall of the West, the Catholic Church carried Roman traditions forward. Bishops filled roles once held by governors. Churches rose where Roman forums once stood. Latin became the sacred language of faith. In many ways, the Church became the heir of Rome, preserving its culture, education, and administration through the centuries of Europe's early Middle Ages.
While the Western Empire fell, the Eastern Roman Empire, ruled from Constantinople, thrived for another 1,000 years. Known later as the Byzantine Empire, it carried forward Roman law, Roman traditions, and Roman pride. Its emperors still called themselves Caesars. Its people still called themselves Romans. Through Byzantium, Rome's heartbeat continued, shaping art, religion, and diplomacy well into the medieval world.
Even after its political collapse, the idea of Rome inspired kingdoms across Europe. The Holy Roman Empire in Germany tried to revive Rome's authority centuries after its fall. The kings of France and Spain claimed their legitimacy through ancient Roman bloodlines. Even modern Italy, formed in the 19th century, called its parliament the Senate and its capital Rome, a deliberate reminder of what once was. Rome stopped ruling the world, but the world never stopped looking back to Rome.
If you want to feel Rome's echo, follow its roads. The Romans built more than 400,000 kilometers of stone-paved roads, connecting cities, ports, and provinces across 3 continents. Even after the empire's collapse, many of these roads continued to guide travelers, merchants, and armies for centuries. The phrase, "all roads lead to Rome," wasn't just poetic, it was true. And in many ways, it still is. Rome connected the ancient world, and those connections shaped the modern one. Imagine standing in the ruins of the Forum today. Marble pillars lean like weary giants, fragments of statues lie scattered across the ground. Grass grows between the cracks of ancient roads, once walked by senators, poets, and emperors. It looks like silence, but listen closely. The echoes are still there. You can almost hear the footsteps of legionnaires, the murmurs of merchants, the voices of orators addressing the crowd. Rome has become memory, but it is a memory that still speaks. Rome's story is more than battles, emperors, and conquests. It is a reminder of something bigger, something timeless. No empire, no matter how mighty, lasts forever. The greatest cities crumble, the strongest armies fade. Even the eternal city itself bows to time. And yet, in falling, Rome became something greater than power. It became a story, a lesson carried through centuries.
Today, almost 1,600 years after the fall of the West, Rome still lingers in our language, our laws, our buildings, our religions, and our imagination. The dream of Rome, its order, its culture, its ambition, shaped the very foundation of the modern world. And perhaps that's Rome's truest legacy. It reminds us that while empires rise and fall, their stories live on, whispered across time. The Western Roman Empire ended in 476 CE, but Rome never really ended. It became stone and memory, language and law, faith and philosophy. Standing among its ruins today, beneath the same sun that once lit the Colosseum, you can still feel it, a heartbeat, faint but steady, carried forward by history itself. Because empires are mortal, but stories are eternal.